I walked into the cooking class, the warm aroma of my surprise filling the air. The Tupperware I held was more than just a lunch. It was a piece of my heart, a recipe passed down through generations. Today was special. Today, I would surprise my dad when he came home from his deployment. I'd cooked for the first time on my own fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, the foods that had always brought us together. But when I set the container down on the counter, I felt the shift. The room fell silent. I turned to see Professor Carter standing in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as they scanned the meal I had prepared. "What is that disgusting smell?" she asked, loudly recoiling, as if I had served her a poison. I felt my face flush with heat, the sting of humiliation creeping in. "It's just lunch, Miss Carter," I said, my voice trembling, but she wasn't listening. "No, this is exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped, reaching down and snatching the container. "This thing does not belong here. This is not a place for this kind of food." I watched helpless as she threw my mother's Tupperware into the trash, the contents of my heart and soul now rotting in front of everyone. Professor Carter's lips curled as she stared down at the trash can, wiping her hands off as if she'd touched something filthy. "Food like this doesn't belong in a professional environment," she said, not sparing me a second glance. Her voice was cold, dismissive, like she had already passed judgment. I stood, frozen eyes locked on the blue Tupperware that had once held my mom's love, now discarded like garbage. The rest of the class, sensing the tension, had fallen silent, but no one spoke up. Carter turned on her heel and made her way back to her desk, tossing a final biting remark over her shoulder. "Maybe next time you'll bring something appropriate for school, Zara," she said, the venom in her words unmistakable. "We're here to learn, not to be distracted by. Whatever that is." Her words stung. They hit deeper than I'd expected, but what hurt even more was the subtle approval I saw in the eyes of the other students. Some white, some Hispanic, some black. No one dared challenge her. I was alone. My meal, a symbol of my culture and family, had been stripped away, reduced to something unworthy in the eyes of the one person whose approval mattered in this space. I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. And when my dad came home, he wouldn't just be facing the woman who humiliated me, he would face something far bigger. The rest of the class went on as usual, but for me, everything had changed. I sat at the back, eyes fixed on the trash can where my lunch had once been, my heart heavy with the sting of Carter's words. The smells of my cooking, the smells of my family, my mother's love had vanished into the air like they never existed. My hands clenched under the desk as I tried to focus on the lesson, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment. How could she just throw it away? How could she degrade something so personal to me, something I'd worked so hard for? My mother had taught me that food was love, that every meal was a piece of us. But to Professor Carter, it was just a joke. It wasn't just the food. It was everything I represented. She saw me, a young woman of color, trying to carve out a place for myself in a world that never seemed to have enough room for people like me. And that meal, it was a symbol of my heritage, of everything I was proud of. But to her, it wasn't worthy. I wasn't worthy. The class carried on as usual, but there was a coldness in the air. The other students, some of whom had been talking and laughing only moments before, now avoided looking at me. Their glances were quick, fleeting, as if they too felt the weight of Carter's judgment. They knew what had happened, but none of them said a word. A few murmured apologies, but it was all so hollow. I could feel it, the collective silence. Tyler, my best friend, had been absent during all of this. He had been on the other side of the room when it happened too far to stop it. I could see the guilt in his eyes when he came over to me after class. "Zara, I'm so sorry," he said quietly, pulling his chair close to mine. I wanted to snap at him, to tell him that it wasn't his fault, but the words didn't come. All I could do was nod the lump in my throat, growing bigger by the second. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Yeah," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. "I'll be fine. I don't understand why she did that." "She's a jerk," Tyler said, his voice hardening. "That was your mom's recipe, Zara. She has no right to do that." The bell rang and Tyler gave me a tight hug before heading out the door. But instead of the comfort I'd hoped for, I only felt more isolated. The hallway outside the classroom was crowded with students, but it was like I was invisible. No one said anything about what had happened, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind, Carter's words, the way she threw my lunch in the trash, the silence in the room. I hadn't told my grandma yet. I wasn't ready to explain to her why I'd come home without the lunch I'd worked so hard on. She'd be heartbroken. But I knew I couldn't let this slide. I had to do something. So the next morning, I pulled out my phone and started looking through my social media accounts. That's when I saw Tyler's post. He'd recorded the entire thing. Every moment. The video was a minute long, but it felt like it captured everything. The disgust in Carter's voice, the way she dumped the food, the silence that followed. I couldn't stop watching it. And the comments were pouring in. A few people sympathized, but the majority seemed unsure. Some even sided with Carter, claiming it was just school rules or that she was just doing her job. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but I couldn't stop scrolling. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. This was about all the students of color who had felt the sting of this kind of treatment. The video went viral. Tyler sent it to our group chat, and soon it was shared by everyone in our school. The next day there were whispers in the halls, but still, no one spoke directly to me. It was like they were waiting for someone to say something, but nobody did. Tyler was the only one who stood up. "This is wrong, Zara," he said after class. "This needs to be reported." I stared at him, unsure. "I don't know if I can," I said quietly. "I mean, what will they do? Who's going to believe me?" Tyler's eyes darkened. "If we don't say anything, it's just going to keep happening. You don't have to do this alone." I knew he was right, but I also knew the consequences of speaking up. The way things worked here, the way the system always protected the powerful, the ones who had the authority. I could feel my heart racing as I considered the weight of what Tyler was asking me to do. That afternoon, I met with him at lunch. He had managed to track down a few other students who had been in the cafeteria that day. Alia, Devin, and Miguel, 3 other students of color who had witnessed Carter's actions. They had their own stories, their own food thrown away. We sat in the library silently. The room felt heavy with the knowledge that something had to change. "I think we need to tell the school," Alia said, breaking the silence. "I think we need to report this." "But what if they don't believe us?" Miguel asked. "What if they just say, 'We're exaggerating, we have the video,'" Tyler said firmly. "We have proof. And if they don't listen to us, then we'll go higher. We'll take this to the district." The next few days were heavy. Tyler's video had gone viral, and the school's walls, which had once felt like a safe space, now felt like a prison. Students whispered in the halls, but no one approached me directly. It was as if they were waiting for someone else to make a move. But there was one thing that weighed heavily on me: the silence. The more I thought about the video, the more I realized that this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just about my lunch. It was about something much bigger. Something I didn't fully understand yet. Then came the tipping point. I was sitting with Tyler at lunch when Mrs. Henderson, a school counselor, approached us. She looked around, her eyes darting nervously before she sat down. "Zara," she whispered, "I need to talk to you." Her voice was low, barely audible over the noise of the cafeteria. "The administration knows about the video. They're telling students to stay out of it, but—" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the door before she continued. "If this goes on, you're going to be the one in trouble." My stomach twisted in disbelief. "What do you mean I'm the one who was humiliated?" She looked uncomfortable, her voice dropping even lower. "Zara, this is bigger than just one teacher. If you push this, they'll find a way to make it look like your fault. I'm afraid the system will protect Professor Carter." I stared at her, feeling my heart sink. Was this really happening? Was I going to be punished for simply being humiliated? "I want to help, but you need to be careful," she added before walking away. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to do. I had to make a choice, stay silent or fight back. But how could I fight the system when it was rigged against me? That night I spoke to my father. Colonel Jamal Johnson had just returned from deployment, and I couldn't wait any longer to tell him what had happened. Sitting on the couch in our modest apartment, I explained everything: how Professor Carter threw away my lunch, how she humiliated me in front of the class, and how the school was doing nothing about it. Dad's face grew serious as he listened. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "You did nothing wrong, Zara. You're my daughter, and no one gets to treat you like that." I nodded, feeling both relieved and terrified. But I knew he was right. I had to stand up for myself. "We're going to take this higher," he said. "I'll talk to the district. If the school won't act, I will make sure they do." The next morning I went to school with a new resolve. My dad was backing me up, and that meant everything. It wasn't just about the lunch anymore. It was about standing up to a system that had allowed this to happen time and time again. I met with Tyler, Aaliyah, and Devin before class. We knew we had to take action. "We're going to the principal's office," I said firmly. "We're not backing down." When we reached the office, the secretary barely looked up from her desk. "Principal Cartwright is busy. You'll need to wait." "We don't have time to wait," Tyler said, his voice hard. "This needs to be dealt with now." But we weren't getting anywhere. The secretary was dismissive, and when we asked for a meeting with Principal Cartwright, she insisted Cartwright was unavailable. "We'll schedule something for later," she said without looking up from her phone. The frustration built inside me. It was clear they didn't want to deal with this. They didn't care about the truth. They were protecting their own, and I was just another kid whose voice didn't matter. But I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. The tipping point came when I finally realized the power I had. Not just with my dad's support, but with the truth. I had something no one could ignore: the video. The evidence. The pressure was building. Students were rallying behind me, sharing their own stories of discrimination. Tyler had been sharing everything on social media, and the video had spread like wildfire. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every student who had been silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. The school couldn't hide it any longer. They were being forced to confront the truth. And so, when my dad made his call to the district, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. The district office was taking it seriously now. The following day, Tyler and I sat in the library, nervously awaiting word from the school administration. That's when the phone rang. It was my dad. He was coming to the school. "I'm here," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and I'm not leaving until this is dealt with." Tyler and I stood up, our hearts pounding in our chests. "He's coming," I said, my voice shaking. "My dad. He's not going to let them get away with this." The moment my dad walked into that school, everything changed. The sound of boots on the polished school floor was unmistakable. Colonel Jamal Johnson stepped into Lincoln Heights Middle School in full military uniform, every medal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The hallway went silent, like the entire school held its breath. Students stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide with recognition. He stood tall, commanding attention without raising his voice. The secretary at the front desk stood up, startled by the sudden authority in the room. "Colonel Johnson," she stammered, "how can I help you?" "My daughter was humiliated in this school," my father said, his voice low but unwavering. "Professor Carter threw away her lunch in front of her classmates, and Principal Cartwright let it happen. I'm here to make sure this doesn't go any further." Principal Cartwright emerged from her office, looking uneasy. "Colonel, No," my father interrupted, his tone sharper now. "You don't get to explain this away. My daughter did nothing wrong. She's my child, and you're going to listen to her." I stood there, my heart pounding as my dad took control of the situation. The school, which had been indifferent to my pain, now seemed to shrink in the face of his authority. The air was thick with tension as my father pulled out a folder from his briefcase, slamming it down on the desk in front of Cartwright. "These are the reports from the students who've experienced the same treatment," he said, pointing to the papers. "And these are the official complaints filed over the last few months, all ignored. You've been complicit in this." Cartwright's face went pale as she scanned the documents. She opened her mouth to say something, but my father wasn't finished. "You've allowed this teacher to target students of color. You've dismissed the concerns of my daughter and her peers. This isn't just about lunch. This is about discrimination." The weight of the evidence hit Cartwright like a freight train. Her hands trembled as she picked up the papers, clearly realizing she couldn't defend herself any longer. "Do you understand what you've allowed to happen here?" my father asked, his voice growing colder. "You protected a teacher who has been openly discriminatory. You failed your students, and now it's time to pay the price." Before Cartwright could respond, the door to the office swung open. Superintendent Rachel Torres stepped in, flanked by two other district officials. Her eyes immediately landed on my father, then on Cartwright. There was no time for small talk. "Colonel Johnson, I've been briefed. This situation is unacceptable," she said, her voice firm and no nonsense. Cartwright started to speak, but Torres cut her off. "Helen, you will be placed on administrative leave while we investigate the incidents you failed to address. As for Professor Carter, she will also be placed on leave pending the outcome of this investigation." The room went silent. Cartwright's expression faltered, and I could see the power she once held slipping away from her. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief, but there was no defense this time. Torres turned to me. "Zara, I want to commend you for speaking up. The evidence you provided was compelling. You've not only stood up for yourself, but for every student who's been silenced." My father placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice softening. "You did it, Zara. You fought for what's right." In that moment, it wasn't just about a lunch. It wasn't just about the humiliation I had faced. It was about exposing the truth about making the system accountable for its actions. And it was about realizing that sometimes it only takes one voice to bring about change. The days following the meeting brought an unexpected sense of relief. The tension that had plagued the school began to lift. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire, but this time it was different. Students who had once remained quiet began to speak up. "I can't believe that happened," I overheard in the hallway. "That wasn't right." The cafeteria, once a place of shame, had turned into a space of pride. Students now brought in foods from their cultures: tamales, curry, fried chicken without fear. We were no longer hiding who we were. No one had to feel ashamed of their heritage. Tyler, Aaliyah, and Devin stood by me, but the solidarity I felt from everyone was overwhelming. Even teachers like Mrs. Henderson nodded their approval when they passed by. It felt like we had changed something real, something deep within the school's culture. The school district acted swiftly after the investigation. Professor Carter was placed on administrative leave, and Principal Cartwright opted for early retirement. Her pension was forfeited, a stark reminder of the consequences for allowing discrimination to thrive. The district adopted new policies on cultural inclusivity, making sure students' identities and traditions would no longer be marginalized. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It was clear that the school had been forced to confront its own biases. For me, the most important part wasn't the punishment of those responsible. It was knowing that the system had finally acknowledged its failure and steps were being taken to ensure something like this would never happen again. Weeks later, the cafeteria felt different. I walked in with my Tupperware, my mom's Tupperware, and set it down on the table with pride. No longer did it symbolize humiliation. Now it was a reminder of what we'd accomplished. Tyler waved me over to our usual table. "You're a legend," he said with a grin. Devin and Aaliyah joined us, and the four of us dug into our meals, laughing and talking. The atmosphere had changed. The school, once oppressive, now felt open. Dr. Anderson, the interim principal, passed by and stopped at our table. He looked at my lunch with a smile. "That looks amazing, Zara. I'd love some." I passed him the Tupperware. "It's my mom's recipe," I said, watching as he took a bite. "It's incredible," he said with a warm smile. I smiled back. "Glad you like it." The cafeteria buzzed with the sounds of students sharing meals and stories. For the first time, I felt that the fight wasn't just mine. We had all won this battle together. My mom was no longer with us, but her legacy, her love, and her lessons lived on in every bite of that food. Today, it wasn't just about the meal. It was about standing up for what was right. It was about dignity, and in that moment I knew we had created something lasting. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. It wasn't about watching Professor Carter face consequences or seeing the school's policy change. It was about how it happened through the system, through the law. I could have let my anger take over. I could have acted out, but I didn't. I followed the legal process, and that made all the difference. When I decided to stand up, it was with evidence in hand, not a raised fist. The line between standing up for yourself and letting emotions drive you is clearer than I ever realized. Anger, no matter how justified, can cloud your judgment. I know now that real change doesn't come from escalating conflict. It comes from understanding when to fight with your words and your actions. Documenting, presenting facts, and involving the right authorities made this possible. It was never about revenge, but about doing what was right in the right way. If you're in a situation where you feel wronged, it's easy to get caught up in the rush of emotions. But take a step back. Start by keeping a record, whether it's writing down incidents or capturing moments on video. Research what's been filed publicly, and don't be afraid to consult with an attorney or authority when the time is right. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you can wield is the truth carefully documented. Communities stay strong when people respect the law and hold each other accountable. The power of institutions like schools only exists when they go unchecked. In the end, it wasn't about the fried chicken or the fight. It was about showing that we won't stand for injustice. We built something better together. The room was still, the air thick with anticipation. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and even some of Lena's staunchest supporters were starting to doubt her. They had seen the email chain, the proof that Lena had been manipulating property values and making promises she knew she couldn't keep. But I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't just about showing her lies. It was about showing how deep the corruption ran and how much damage she had done to this community. I stepped forward, my eyes scanning the crowd. The media cameras were fixed on me, now capturing every word, every gesture. The pressure was mounting, but I was ready. This was the moment I had been building toward. The truth was out, and I was going to make sure everyone in that room heard it. I pulled out a thick stack of papers and laid them on the table in front of the board. "This," I said, my voice firm, "is what you've been supporting. This is the evidence that shows exactly what Lena Caldwell has been doing behind your backs." I began flipping through the pages: property records, bank statements, emails from developers, and most importantly, the false easement claims. These are the documents that prove Lena knew she had no legal right to the road, yet she continued to manipulate the HOA and the county. She had no right to sell properties based on the promise of community access that she didn't control. The room was dead silent as the board members began flipping through the papers. I could see the realization dawning on their faces. One of them, a man named Greg, looked up at me with wide eyes. "You're saying the HOA has been complicit in this. They've known." I nodded, not breaking eye contact. "Exactly. Lena used the HOA as a shield to push through her personal agenda. But it gets worse. She manipulated every aspect of this, from property sales to the board's decisions, to line her own pockets." I picked up the next piece of evidence: photos of the homes that had been sold under false pretenses with inflated prices based on the fraudulent claim of road access. These are the homes that have been sold at premium prices because of the lies Lena and the developers sold to these buyers. None of them had legal access to the road, and now they're all facing the fallout of Lena's actions. The room was in shock. I could feel the tension rise as the reality of Lena's deception hit them. The board members exchanged more glances, some of them visibly uncomfortable, others with a look of disbelief. But there was no denying it anymore. Lena had been manipulating the system for her own gain, and it wasn't just me she had hurt, it was the entire neighborhood. Lena tried to speak up, her voice trembling with frustration. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You're twisting everything I've done. You don't understand the bigger picture. I've been doing what's best for this community, but no one was listening." Her voice was drowned out by the overwhelming sound of reality crashing down on her. The evidence I had laid out in front of them was irrefutable. I could see Lena's carefully constructed walls of control beginning to crumble. She was no longer the powerful figure she once was. She was a woman backed into a corner, desperate and unable to fight back. "You've had your chance, Lena," I said coldly, my eyes never leaving hers. "You've hurt this community. You've lied to the residents. You've misused your position for your own personal gain. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." The silence was deafening. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. Lena's reign was over, and she knew it.